Hello everyone, my name is Jongseon Kim, and today I will present about spectrum of teaching styles in East Asian physical education, examining perception, ability use pathways through social cognitive theory. My name is Jongseon Kim. I'm a doctoral student in Arizona State University. I'm especially interested about school-based physical activity programs, old school approach, also spectrum of teaching styles. What is the spectrum of teaching styles? First, Sarah Ashworth and Muskan Moston introduced in 1966 the spectrum conceptualized teaching as a continuum of decision making defined by who hold decision making authority, the teacher or the learner. Here is the framework. I love this axiom. Teaching is a chain of decision making. So teaching style having 11 different teaching style A to teaching style K. Teaching style A to E is student dominant teaching style because teacher dominant teaching style because teacher make majority of decision. Also, teaching style F to K is called student-centered, student-dominant teaching style because majority of decision making defined by student. Also, a lot of scholars saying student A to E is teacher-centered teaching style and F to K is student-centered teaching style. However, every 11 teaching style is student-centered teaching style, or because like it's based on about student needs and their motivation. So teaching style A to E is teacher clustered and teacher dominant teaching style, not like student centered or teacher centered teaching style. So teaching style A is a teacher dominant teaching style and teacher make majority of decision. So for example, in the like driving situation, when teaching style A is teacher hold the key and student just sitting behind, and when you go to the teaching style A to K, teacher gradually hold the key, hand the key to the student. So teaching style K is student hold the key and student drive the car, teacher sitting behind. So this is a brief explanation of teaching style, spectrum of teaching style. Also, let me introduce about spectrum use and perspective survey. We call this SOUP survey. First, perceptions is what physical educators think a teaching style can do for a student. So perceptions show teachers' pedagogical values. So for example, teacher can think about teaching style A is good for their motivation, their fun, or their students' learning. And use is what teachers actually report using in their PE classes. For example, use show what teachers translate into real instruction. So if teacher believe teaching style A is good for their student, teachers can use this teaching style in their classroom settings. So we having 11 different teaching style. So for example, if teacher believe teaching style F is good for their student motivation, teacher can use in their classroom settings or not because they can having a multiple constraints or based on like teachers a relationship between teacher and student. So it having a lot of constraints about using different teaching styles. So their belief and use can be different in their context. So Dr. Donetta Cothran and Pamela Hodges Colina developed this instrument about student spectrum of teaching style use and perception surveys. First, they published about student version. Also, they published teachers version as well. In 2005, they broadened their perspective into cross-cultural settings. Until 2026, 70 studies published. Also, when we adding in progress studies, over the 20 country contexts utilize this SOUP survey. In terms of participants across SOUP studies, total reported participants across SOUP studies and study types over the 2,000 PT students, over the 3,000 of P teachers. So total participants is over 6,000. And we need to think about cross-cultural evidence of spectrum of teaching styles. Here's the landmark of study, a cross-cultural investigation of use of teaching styles. Dr. Kothran and her colleagues study about over the 7 countries spectrum use and perception of teaching styles for the teachers. And here's a clear implication. Teaching practice must be analyzed within specific cultural and institutional context, because based on their difference about culture and institutional context, their belief system and use in their classroom may be different. So I want to focus about East Asian context, only Korean and China. They shared a lot of common things. For example, they shared Confucian heritage culture. So Confucian heritage culture is deeply inside our DNA. For example, like when the elder generation orders something, command something, the younger generation must be followed. Also, for example, in the dining situation, younger generation must be waiting when older generations start to eat. So that is the Confucian heritage culture, and that is deeply inside our culture and our pedagogical values and our education system. So Korean and Chinese government wanna do student-centered multiple curriculum reforms. For example, in Korea, 7th national curriculum reforms 2009, 2015, 2022 revised curricular based on student-centered reforms. Also, China did multiple student-centered reforms as well. So both like Korea and Chinese governments is deeply inside about Confucian heritage culture, which is very dominant teacher-centered culture. So both government want to do student-centered reforms. Also, China and Korea having a shared exam-centered culture. Both systems place strong emphasis on academic achievement, test preparation, and colleagues' interest outcomes. Let me introduce about theoretical lens of this study. This study is deeply based on social cognitive theory made by Bandura. It is our behavior is determined the relationship among environment and personal factors and our behavior. So for example, in this study, our behavior will be teachers' use, and first personal factors will be teachers' perception, and environment will be East Asian culture. But in this study, we will zoom inside about perception and their use. So I make these direct pathways. If they believe teaching style A is good for their perception, is high for their perception, they will more frequently using in their classroom about teaching style A. However, I want to see more deep insight about their mechanism. So I adding perceive ability in the middle. So if they believe teaching style something is good for their student, they will use in their classroom. What about we adding perceive ability? They cross these indirect pathways or not? So research question 1 is, does perception predict use directly for teaching style B and teaching style H? Research question 2 is there an indirect relationship via perceive ability? Here is our method. We utilize the cross-sectional design. Also, participants was over the 200. We using structural equation modeling. Here is the result and discussion. We found out some unexpected patterns across two contrasting styles. We examined perceived ability use pathway across the 11 different teaching styles. Among the 11 teaching styles, teaching style B and H stood out. Teaching style B is traditional teacher-centered, teacher-dominant teaching style, and teaching style H is student dominant teaching style, and they represent very different instructional demands. So we initially hypothesis about if their teachers' perceived ability is low, they more frequently using teaching style B because that is the traditional one. And teaching style A, student-centered teaching style, is historically like think about they need more skills or their ability, teacher's ability, because like student-centered teaching style need to teacher have to think about multiple students' needs and their motivation. So we hypothesis like their perceived ability low, they will not using this teaching style. However, they both show a negative ability use pathways. These unexpected patterns become the focus of our interpretation. So here's two different teaching style. Teaching style B, practice teaching style. That is the classic teacher-centered teaching style. For example, teacher make multiple station and student just follow that station. And teaching style H is divergent discovery. The teacher select the topic and student produce many possible responses. So it is called very creativity teachers, student-centered teaching style. The model fit of both model was very stable. Here is the result. Here is the statistics. About teaching style B, direct pathways and indirect pathways both significant. However, direct pathways explained approximately 48% of variance in use. Indirect pathways explain approximately 7% of variance in use. However, as you can see, there is a negative beta here. Even though they just explain 7%, they show indirect negative pathways. Teaching style H having the similar patterns, both indirect and direct pathways is significant, and direct pathways explain approximately 45% of variance in use. Indirect pathways explains approximately 9% of variance in use. However, they also showing the negative indirect pathways. So why? Why ability and use pathway is negative? Let's understanding about potential mechanism. Teaching style B, we hypothesis like similar like that. If their perceived ability is low, they will utilizing more frequently their like very easy way because that is the traditional default based on Confucian heritage culture. They just select the safety strategy, what they learned. Like when they are a student, their teachers are using exact the same way because that is the traditional default. So they just follow the tradition. So practice style may function as a low risk instructional default. And teaching style H is something different with our hypothesis. Their ability is low. They frequently using this teaching style. So student-centered reform pressure may increase reported use. So it can be their like measurement bias. Also, teacher may step back without feeling fully capable of facilitating open-ended learning. Also, use may reflect surface level of delegation rather than confident implementation. So they don't have any ability to using student-centered teaching style. So they just step back and just give the ball to the student. Oh, I will give the ball. I don't know anything. You just utilize everything. You just do. So lower perceived ability may coexist with reform-oriented instructional expectations. Here is the takeaways. First, spectrum in East Asia. The spectrum remains a valid instructional decision-making framework for examining perception and use pathways in East Asia physical education settings. Also, perception exerts large direct effect on instructional use, both teaching style B and H. So if they believe that is good for their student, they more frequently use in their classroom settings, both teaching style B and H. However, perceived ability adds a small but reliable negative in their pathways. So in terms of teaching style B, if they feel or if they believe teaching style B is good for their student, even though their perceived ability is low, they frequently using that teaching style. And in terms of teaching style H, they know that teaching style is good for their student. They are good for their student motivation and learn or their fun. Even though their perceived ability is low, they are more frequently used in their classroom. So teacher may value our teaching style, but valuing it does not always mean feeling capable of using it well. So as I mentioned earlier, Chinese and Korean government do conducted multiple student-centered reform. So that student-centered reform, if they are not having like professional development of our student-centered teaching style, that can be just poster on the wall. So they just select it as a like uh, surface level delegation. They just step back and give the board to the student, and they named it as a like student-centered teaching style. Thank you very much. Here's my context.